Hello everybody, this is the Catholic Esquire. As promised in my last video, in this video I'm going to show you why the founder of the SSPX, Archbishop Lefebvre, and the 4 bishops he consecrated in 1988 were not excommunicated, contrary to popular belief, and contrary to what was stated in that third part of the Mass of the Ages trilogy. And to begin to understand this, you have to understand this first concept, and it's extremely important. There are only 2 ways to be excommunicated. Either what they call technically ferende sententiae, that's a formal decree of excommunication, where the Pope says, I formally find and decree this person is to be excommunicated. That's the first way. The second way, and much more common way, is latae sententiae. And that's essentially an automatic excommunication. In other words, if you did something based on the authority under canon law itself, you're automatically excommunicated without the kind of formal decree that is required for the first type of excommunication. And that's why they call it ipso facto. The fact speaks for itself, excommunication as well. Ipso facto, automatic excommunication. That's what we're talking about with respect to Archbishop Lefebvre. There was never a formal decree of excommunication made by John Paul II or any other pope. So keep that in mind, because in order for Archbishop Lefebvre and the 4 bishops to have been excommunicated, that means they must have been excommunicated pursuant to the requirements set forth in canon law. All right? Now, the source of all this confusion is this Ecclesia Day document from 1988. Let's take a look at that first, and then we'll go from there. All right, so we're looking at the Ecclesia Day document from 1988. The relevant paragraph for our purposes is paragraph 3. I'm not going to read this all to you. You can read it yourself. I'm not going to do that to you. But I will restate the second sentence in this, which is relevant for what we're going to talk about today. In performing such an act, that's the consecrating of bishops, and that's the issue, that's the entire issue here, is that Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated bishops contrary to the wishes of John Paul II and without papal approval. Okay, that's an admitted fact. All right, Ecclesia Day says, in performing such an act, notwithstanding the formal canonical warning sent to them by the Cardinal Prefect of the Congregations for Bishops on 17 June last, Monsignor Lefebvre and the priests, and he lists off the priest names, have incurred the grave penalty of excommunication envisaged by ecclesiastical law. Period. Now, there's a footnote, that footnote number 4. Let's take a look at that real quick. Footnote number 4 refers to Code of Canon Law 1382. All right. We're going to look at 1382 next because that's going to be the source of that statement, the authority for that statement made in paragraph 3. And yes, if you just read this paragraph 3 in Ecclesia Day, it appears very much that Archbishop Lefebvre and the bishops were excommunicated. But it was by ecclesiastical law in canon law, which is the source of that footnote. So let's take a look at that. Now, it gets a little confusing here because the Ecclesia Day document referred to 1382, Canon 1382. In 2021, the numbering of the canons got changed. So actually, what used to be 1382 is now 1387. So let's look at 1387. It says, both the bishop, who without pontifical mandate consecrates a person, a bishop, and one who receives the consecration from him, incur a latae sententiae excommunication reserved to the apostolic see. So again, it says, pursuant to canon law, you are excommunicated, latae sententiae, automatically, if you consecrate a person bishop without pontifical mandate. Well, the person who does the consecration and those who receive it are excommunicated automatically. Yes, that is what canon law says. It's very clear. No one doubts that. Again, doesn't look very good for the Archbishop up to this point. But if this is going to be pursuant to canon law, if the authority for this excommunication is based on canon law, which is what Ecclesia Ecclesia Day said, then we have to look at all of canon law. So let's look at some other important provisions. I want to call your attention to Canon 1323. 1323 is concerns penal sanctions. Of course, that's what an excommunication is, a penal sanction. And what we're going to look at here is subsection 4, or note 4. No one is liable to a penalty, like excommunication, who, when violating a law or precept, acted under compulsion of grave fear, even if only relative, or by reason of necessity or grave inconvenience, unless, however, the act is intrinsically evil or tends to be harmful to souls. All right, well, first of all, consecrating bishops by a bishop is not intrinsically evil. As a matter of fact, even if you do so without permission and there's no basis for doing so, like I'm going to show you with Archbishop Lefebvre, the consecration is still valid. So we can't possibly say consecrating bishops without permission of the Pope is intrinsically evil. That's part of the nature of the office of bishop as part of the sacrament. So we can't even say that. But what Archbishop Lefebvre did say is that he did consecrate without papal mandate by reason of necessity. What is this reason of necessity? Well, it's actually quite straightforward. Archbishop Lefebvre was very concerned about the loss of tradition, in teaching, in liturgy, in discipline. Okay, if you don't have teaching, liturgy, and discipline available in seminaries, available for the laity, what else is there in the church? Archbishop Lefebvre's concerns about maintaining tradition is the core of the church. It's what we believe. It's keeping what's been in existence for 2,000 years still alive. And so with the loss of the Mass, with the Nouveau Theologie, with the concerns with Second Vatican Council, all these things come together. And in order to keep tradition alive, and Archbishop Lefebvre, and this is important, was nearing the end of his life. Everybody knew that. He was getting very sick at this point. He only had a couple years left. He knew that, and that turned out to be true. He needed to consecrate new bishops in order for them to be able to continue to run seminaries and ordain new priests who understood tradition and could provide that necessary teaching, liturgy, and faith guidance for the laity. It goes to the heart of the church. And that was essentially why Archbishop Lefebvre did what he did after trying his best to work with the Vatican and the Pope as best he could. He got to the point where it was obvious he needed to do something or he was going to die. And tradition could die with him. And that's what he could not have. All right? Now, I know what you're saying. You're going to say, well, who is he to decide what's necessary? Obviously, it's not necessary. John Paul II didn't think it was necessary, so why does he just get to decide what's necessary? If that's the case, anybody could just decide what's necessary. That's ridiculous. Well, let me show you something else here, my friends, in canon law. Scroll down to Canon 1324. All right? And look specifically here at note. Let's look at specifically note 8. One who erroneously, but culpably, thought that some one of the circumstances existed, which are mentioned in Canon 1323, note 4, the one we were just looking at, or 5, that perpetrator of a violation is not necessarily exempt from penalty, but the penalty prescribed in the law or precept must be diminished. All right? And one more thing to look at here. In the circumstances, and I'm looking now at section 1324, subsection 3. And the circumstances mentioned in section 1, again, this is the mitigation canon that what we're talking about here. The offender is not bound by a late sententiae penalty, but may have lesser penalties or penances imposed for the purposes of repentance or repair of scandal. Okay, so what does all this mean? What this means, my friends, and this is so extremely important. Yeah, it does matter what Archbishop Lefebvre thought, and whether he thought truly in his heart that it was out of necessity for him to consecrate those bishops. 1324 very clearly makes it obvious that the subjective state of a person's mind is relevant to whether an excommunication is imposed. It's clear as day, clear as day, and it's very clearly relates to whether necessity requires the act, which otherwise would be illegal. Because Canon 1324 Note 8 says it applies to 1323 Note 4, and that's the section where it talks about necessity, the exception for necessity. And if you say, well, that doesn't mean he shouldn't be excommunicated, yes, it does, because in 1324 Section 3, it very clearly says that in the circumstances mentioned, the offender is not bound by a late sententia penalty. Therefore, what we see, my friends, is that Archbishop Lefebvre, if he acted out of necessity, he is not liable to any penalty. But even if he was wrong about that issue, even if he was wrong, erroneous about whether there was a necessity exception to consecrating those bishops, Canon 1324 says he still is going to be excommunicated automatically. This is clear as day. The Archbishop was not excommunicated pursuant to canon law, and therefore he is not excommunicated. Because again, even if we look at Ecclesia Dei, in Ecclesia Dei, that was not a formal decree of excommunication. That was just a statement that said the Archbishop was excommunicated automatically under canon law. But that was an incorrect statement, as I just showed you here. And that is why the Archbishop is not excommunicated. One final point here, my friends. You're going to read in that Ecclesia Dei document that somehow Archbishop Lefebvre was schismatic or committed a schismatic act. Don't let that portion confuse you. That's actually somewhat of a distraction here. Because remember, the Ecclesia Dei document very clearly said that the basis for an excommunication was automatic and not a formal decree. So again, all that matters is under canon law what Archbishop Lefebvre did and whether that qualifies for an automatic excommunication or not. But just for fun, I just wanted to show you Canon 751, which defines schism. And schism is the refusal of submission to the Supreme Pontiff or communion with the members of the church subject to him. Archbishop Lefebvre never refused the authority of the Pope. He never said the Pope did not have authority. He never said he was not the Pope. He never said that John Paul II, as the Pope of the Church, did not have the authority that goes along with that office. He never said that. What he said was that out of necessity, he had to disobey his request not to consecrate new bishops in one particular case. But he never denied the authority of the Supreme Pontiff. And anybody who knows Archbishop Lefebvre's history, he has a stellar record for being a wonderful bishop, missionary bishop, for converting so many souls in Africa. He was invited to participate in the Second Vatican Council. He was very well respected. And to claim that the man was rejecting the Catholic Church like a Protestant, that's what schism is. Well, that wasn't Archbishop Lefebvre, and I think most people understand that. So to wrap this up, to put a nice little bow onto this for you, the key takeaway today is to remember that there was never a formal decree, there was never an adjudication, there was never a trial, and there was never a formal pronouncement by the Pope that Archbishop Lefebvre and the four bishops were excommunicated. What the Ecclesia Dei document said is essentially just a statement that says they were excommunicated automatically under the terms of canon law. But as I showed you, based on necessity, Archbishop Lefebvre and the four bishops were not automatically excommunicated under the terms of canon law itself. We'd be having a totally different discussion if there was a formal ferende sententiae excommunication, but that didn't happen. They said, well, it's based on canon law. So then we have to look at canon law. And I showed you very clearly that, number one, out of necessity, if Archbishop acted out of necessity, he's not excommunicated. And even if he was wrong about the necessity, he's still not excommunicated. Because canon law provides that if the person acted erroneously out of necessity, he's still not excommunicated. And I showed you the provisions for that. I hope this was useful and helpful. Please subscribe to the channel. Feel free to comment to the video below. And thank you for listening. God bless and have a wonderful day.